Hello, everyone, and welcome to the November 2021 Insights interview from the Payments Association. Now, I first met this month's VIP guest over 5 years ago at a dinner when he was heading up Mastercard in the UK and Ireland. At the time, he was crystal clear about what was really happening in payments. He had strong views about where the industry was headed and our collective role in shaping it. So it's no surprise to me to see him now leading Mastercard as President Europe. And he studied at the University of London, has an MBA from Imperial College Business School, and before developing his career at KPMG and Mastercard Advisors. So please welcome the President Europe at Mastercard, Mark Barnett.
Hi, Tony. Very nice to be with you today.
It's great to have you here, and thank you for being open to share your insights with our community, Mark. Much appreciated. So at the start of every Insights interview, I ask my guests how they stay motivated. What makes them go the extra mile when faced with typically challenging jobs with travel and stress and other tensions. And you lead the division of a firm that spans 53 countries and 950 million people, and you employ 5,000 colleagues. So, what on earth is it, Mark, that continues to motivate you 18 years after entering?
Well, it's partly what you say there, Tony. The breadth and variety of my job is absolutely fascinating. I've been in payments a very long time. So I've been with Mastercard 18 years, but you might not know this, that I joined Access from the Joint Credit Card Company as a management trainee back in 1990. It had just changed its name to Signet, and then it became First Data.
Wow.
But so that's 31 years. Now, I was in consulting for a good chunk of my career, but I was in retail banking, consulting and payments. So, I've been in and around this industry for a long, long time. And it has changed so dramatically and continues to change so dramatically and throw up new challenges that it's always interesting. So there's the content of the job, there's the variety of the job, because in a general management role, I can wake up one morning and it's about a sales pitch, and the next it's about a regulatory matter, and the next it's budgeting for next year. So there's a great variety, but in the end, I think, for most of us, it's about the people. I've got a fabulous team here, the whole team across Mastercard Europe, the whole team across Europe, my leadership team, they're just great people, and my customers. So I just get energy from being in and around the people in the payments industry.
And the particular role you took on, though, which is, this is a key part of a business worth over $350 billion. It's not an easy gig, is it? I mean, an awful lot of people would say they've reached the previous level. UK and Ireland is fine, but you decided to take on Europe.
Yeah, I always think you got to, keep moving forward. I think leading Mastercard in Europe is one of the best jobs in the company. Everything that we do at Mastercard is done in Europe. When we think about our multi-rail strategy, when we think about our services strategy, we're ahead in what we're doing in Europe than any other part of the world. There are parts of Europe that are very, very developed in terms of payment systems, some parts less so. As long as I can continue to have fun, I think that's pretty critical. If you're not having fun, do something else. But
yeah, I agree.
As long as I'm continuing to have fun, which I am, and moving forward, then I'm going to stick with it. I personally love it.
Brilliant. I must say, we did have fun at that dinner a few years ago. And I remember thinking to myself, this is a business that has got a leader who enjoys his work so much, and it's infectious. So anybody in the audience who's lucky enough to get dinner with Mark, you'll be very lucky. So let's move on a little bit about how, the industry is likely to develop. I mean, I remember you when you were appointed to running this particular part of the business. You were quoted as saying, let's go out to run a business that's focused on doing well, doing good, and making people's lives easier. And those are three complementary, potentially, but also potentially conflicting objectives. How on earth do you balance those three, especially the one about doing good, while also actually doing well, making money, and making people's lives easier?
No, look, I think they're all totally connected. what we do all day, every day is make people's lives easier by helping them to pay in a safe, simple, smart way. But doing well and doing good are equally complementary. So we have, a very strong focus on sustainability and inclusion. Actually, our ESG, all the top team at Mastercard have ESG goals, that goes directly towards our compensation. And I think the two big areas on the doing good bit are inclusion. And you might not think that's such a big issue for Europe, but it's still an issue. There's plenty of people who are excluded. And a few years ago, we committed to working with our partners to try and financially include 500 million people. That's happened. We're doubling down to 1 billion. And when you think that nearly half the world's adult population is underserved financially, is not taking part in the digital economy, that's pretty staggering.
Yeah.
But, even inclusion in Europe, we've discovered, with this pandemic, there's been a massive acceleration in digital. And some people, especially older groups, not specifically older groups, but aren't as comfortable using digital platforms or digital technology as others. So you could say they're excluded. So, we're always trying to find ways to include people in the digital economy, include people in e-commerce, include people in digital payments. But I think also sustainability is another big, it is the big topic of the moment, because without a thriving planet, none of us can thrive. And, you said Mastercard. What's Mastercard's role in that? Well, our role is, let me tell you a story. We were in Stockholm a couple of weeks ago. I was there with Michael, my new CEO, and RJ, our outbound. No, actually, RJ wasn't there. It was Michael. And we put together a dinner based around sustainability, and we had the chief exec of one of the largest clothing retailers, the chief exec of the largest food retailer in the Nordics. We had one of our biggest banking partners. We had the chairman of the chairwoman, in fact, of the National Rail Company. We had a professor of climatology, a previous prime minister, a whole bunch of people right across industry, not payments or financial services necessarily. And our convening power around this is that we sit at the middle of an ecosystem on which there's 2.5 billion consumers on one side, and there's 60 million businesses on the other. And, the sustainability of the planet, climate change isn't going to be solved by governments alone. It isn't going to be solved by the private sector alone. It's going to be solved by a whole bunch of us working together. And we had this, he was a professor of climatology there. And, and he told us all the stuff that I'm sure most of the people watching this know, that we're at 1.5 degrees above pre-industrialization levels. And if we get to 2, it's very uncertain. If we get to 3, it's catastrophe. But I thought he was going to end on a very gloomy note, but he didn't at all, actually. He said, what an exciting time to be alive. That the people in this room, because he said, I'm confident the people in this room and many others are going to solve this problem. And we're the ingenuity and creativity of humankind is going to come to our rescue. Not by being complacent about it, but by working very hard. And a couple of things we're doing, our Priceless Planet Coalition, where we're trying to plant 100 million trees. That's offsetting carbon. The real goal has got to be to produce less. But also we've put a carbon calculator on our network, working with a company called Economy, also up in the Nordics, that calculates the carbon footprint of your purchases. So that's available to every one of our customers. They could put just an API call out via the mobile banking app, and they can be informing consumers what their impact is, and people can also offset using our donation platform. So there's just a toe in the water. It's just a start, but it's good to show you that how, as a network, we can help try and bring some of these things together. And we're going to continue working on it. I've got a project running at the moment looking at what are the next 10, 15, 20 things we can do as an ecosystem to try and try and tackle this problem.
Well, that's really exciting to hear, and I'm delighted that you're showing leadership. Certainly the EPA's advisory board, we had one of our calls just last week, and we were talking about what our role is in enabling a more sustainable world. And curiously enough, when you look at just payments on its own, it's a little bit difficult to think beyond having Green's cards and a low carbon demanding factories and offices. What else we can do? But I think what you were doing in that meeting recently at dinner, were you getting together, you showing your support as a, if you like, collaboration across industries. And that's where I think we have a role to play, because we are thought leaders in payments, and we can actually be thought leaders around sustainable financial services as well.
Yeah, no, couldn't agree more. I mean, it's really that network effect that everybody involved in payments knows that there's an ecosystem, and we can use that ecosystem to try and solve some of these problems.
Very good. So let's look back a little bit. You said it has changed enormously, the industry. What are the kind of couple of things you've seen that's changed since you started out all 30 odd years ago, and what are the things that's driving it?
So look, when I started out, most card transactions were done on a zip-zap machine. There was a bit of carbon paper, and you made a telephone call to the authorization centre in Southend-on-Sea. And actually, still a large amount of the payments industry is based down in Southend-on-Sea, especially from the old Access Mastercard sort of side of it.
Yeah.
And as an industry, we put a mag stripe and ePALs, and then we went to chip and pin, and then we went to contactless, and now we're seeing more and more tokens so that I can use this thing to pay, and this thing will become a terminal. And so just on the core payment side, and we're tokenizing merchant card vaults as well, so to make the whole ecosystem super secure. So just on the core payment side, it's continued to progress. Sorry. Software update.
By the way, that's the world we're in. It's a bit like somebody knocking on the door when, I've got an Amazon delivery, software update, both the same things.
But as far as Mastercard's concerned, then, about 15 years ago, we started looking at at some services that sit around the core payment. And that, I think, was one of our major sort of differentiation points, because there's a lot of data that flows with payments that's useful in a loyalty perspective or a marketing perspective or a fraud prevention or a cyber prevention perspective. And we built a whole suite of services that sit around that core of the payments. And that's been, as I say, that's been going 15 years, but it continues and continues. And then more recently, we've, we call it our multi-rail strategy, but more recently, account-to-account payments are becoming much more relevant.
Yes, open banking.
Well, not just because of open banking, but account-to-account payments used to be quite boring. They were buried in the bowels of the operations of the banks, and we're talking direct debits, vast amounts of vast numbers of transactions, very high value transactions. But how you get your salary paid, and you pay your mortgage and your utility bills and everything else. But I think it was 11 years ago that VocaLink made those rails real time with the introduction of faster payments. Mm-hmm. And all over the world, those old batch ACH rails have become real time. Some of it's our infrastructure, some of it's other people's, but that gives an alternative rail, an alternative set of choices and possibilities to our customers, whether they be banks or fintechs or retailers or governments, on how to get paid and be paid. How to pay and get paid. And we find that a really exciting. As you know, we acquired VocaLink, and then we've done various things in the Nordics. And I think out of the top 40 GDP countries around the world, we run 14 of their ACH infrastructures, but it's not really the infrastructure where we're not going to run the infrastructure everywhere, but it's the applications, things like bill pay, cross-border services, or services like our Money Mules detection service that can sit on top of any fast account-to-account rails. And so, as we did with the core payments business and build services around, we're looking to do very similar to the account-to-account rails. So exciting times there.
Yes,
and
indeed.
Then, well, no, I'll pause there because I know you've got some more questions.
So the other question is specifically about the open banking component, and I'm not going to comment on the OBIE specifically because there's some background that we all are aware of as an industry, and I think we've got to be looking at moving on from that. What's interesting is one of the things that open banking standards enable is payment initiated payment service and PISPs coming in and helping to facilitate bank-to-bank payments. But the kind of some people would say that the actual volume of transactions in open banking enabled payments has been fairly low so far. Why do you think that is, and what's to be done?
So a couple of things there, Tony. We have an open banking service. We made an acquisition recently of Aya, an open banking company in Europe, but Finicity in the US as well. And you're right, the payment side of open banking has been pretty slow to develop. And so you have to ask yourself why. We have a couple of open banking services running in the UK. One is with Tesco, and it's a very simple pay me proposition where rather than use my debit card to pay off my Tesco credit card, I use open banking. Super simple use case. It's not really competing with a debit card because most people actually pay off their credit card using a direct debit.
Yeah.
And so all the bells and whistles that you have with a debit card, a Mastercard debit card, the chargebacks, the international acceptance, the KYC AML rules, rule book that sits around the whole of the ecosystem isn't as important in a simple pay me type transaction.
Indeed.
And so open banking is quite a suitable answer. And it's competing against myself because it's competing against the debit cards I have. But we figure if we don't compete against ourselves, somebody else will. So it's useful learning. One of the biggest banks in the UK is using our service for that same use case, but also now it's started using it between its consumers and the retailers that it has on its books for a sort of closed loop payment experience. In the end, there are a couple of things that cards have that open banking doesn't have at the moment. The first, and we call it protect and resolve. So open banking resolve, which is a service that we now offer, is the whole consumer protection piece that comes, chargebacks, disputes, arbitration, all that sort of stuff.
Very good.
And open banking protect is kind of the franchise rule book, if you like. Has the consumer really given permission for somebody to initiate a payment out of my? Is that entity properly licensed? Have they done their KYC AML? Are they regulated in the right way? So until you've got both of those, then it's very hard to get the open banking piece running.
I'm sure that's true. And do we think, how confident are we that those things will be addressed and therefore adopted or resulting in adoption of these new things? Because I remember looking back at the early days when Mastercard in particular invested a great deal in contactless, and volumes were stubbornly low then for years. And now everybody's paying up to £100 soon in a contactless manner. Do you think it'll be a bit like that? Will we get to the lift-off point at some stage?
So I don't know, but contactless is a great case in point, because all we were asking people to do was make a very small change in behavior rather than putting your card into a machine, tapping a pin, just tap it. And so it was to people's advantage, and everything else was the same. And we launched that in the UK in 2004, Contactless. 2014, it went live on London Underground. And as you say now, across Europe, 85% of all in-person transactions are contactless.
Wow.
Which is colossal.
It's a great success story.
Yeah. Now, open banking, I don't know. It's really very much in its infancy, as you said. We're certainly placing some bets in the open banking space because we want to be able to offer that if our customers want it. But, you know, there is something about payments where trust is required. And the Mastercard brand promise is consumers will trust retailers and merchants. You create trust between those two groups. So you can take your Mastercard into any shop anywhere in the world and buy goods worth thousands of pounds. That merchant knows they're going to get paid, and you know if anything goes wrong, you'll be looked after. And that's the trust of a brand promise like Mastercard. Now, if that brand promise isn't there, it's quite hard to see why a consumer would press on a button. Now, the button might be the button of one of our biggest retailers, or in which case, then you can see some adoption. But, you know, we'll see. The one thing I would say is, once you start layering on the consumer protections, and once you start layering on the sort of franchise component that's needed for this to work in the real world, then the economics start looking very similar to debit card economics anyway. So yes. Are we solving for a problem that, I mean, I think there'll be particular use cases, that pay me one being an example, but is it destined to be the future of payments? I just don't know.
So there's some cautious and considered optimism I hear. And by the way, I completely agree in terms of the commercial model. At the moment, it just isn't there. And my hope is that the data enriched nature of the open banking enabled payments will be a source of value added to consumers in a way that there is more value in the transaction. But let's see. That's not for today, I don't think. I'd like to move on. You've been good enough to tell us a little bit about your commitment to inclusion across Europe, and that's wonderful across the world. Can we move on to talk a little bit about the nature of payment systems in the UK, please?
Yeah.
We have some honourable institutions, individuals doing a really earnest and considered and excellent job in some areas. But how well do you think the Bank of England and the payment systems regulator are doing at developing the UK's payment systems as well as they need to be?
Look, I think payments come a long way. I was on the PSR's panel when it was originally set up. Must be 7 or 8 years ago. 6 or 7 years ago, maybe. I'm losing count. Time flies when you're having fun. And the ability for other people, a lot of people are part of your association, to participate in account-to-account payments I think that problem has been solved largely. I think they've done a terrific job in opening up access to what used to be the bank-owned schemes, but are now schemes that anyone can participate on if they meet the right standards. And we see a lot of competition in the card world as well. That landscape's moved enormously. Obviously there's players like PayPal. Well, there's loads of players. As I look across Europe, there's a lot of players that started off in the P2P space, like Swish, who then go into e-com and then go in-store as well, moving on account-to-account rails. We see things like EPI emerging across continental Europe. So I think competition generally has increased enormously, and that can only be a good thing for consumers and businesses in the end. So I'd give them some pretty high marks, I think.
So what else should they be doing? And if we're good at this, should we be potentially helping to lead how the global payment systems work? Should we be exporting our expertise?
I think in many ways we are. If you look around the world, GDPR was invented in Europe. We made it a Mastercard standard globally. Well, we distilled a very large document into a bunch of principles around data, like it's your data, you own it, we'll only ever use it with your permission, we'll only ever use it for your benefit. Those are the GDPR principles. We wrote those into our rules. So, that's not a PSR or Bank of England led thing. That's a European Commission led thing. But even so, I think we see a lot of that exploitation of good stuff. And we invested in Vocalink because it was the best and is the best account-to-account platform, and we've taken it to 14 markets around the world.
Yes.
So I think there's a lot to learn from the UK, but there's other parts of the. I used to look after the Nordics. I still look after the Nordics, but I used to look after UK, Ireland, Nordics, and Baltics. And some of the things they've done in the Nordics are terrific. But equally, they've had a process where they've arrived at a cashless society without necessarily, or maybe arrived at it a bit quicker than they expected to. And I think the work that our authorities are doing around access to cash, because we're no enemies of cash. I mean, obviously, our job is to provide really convenient and safe payment solutions that aren't necessarily cash, but there is a place for cash in society, and we need to figure out the best way to provide that.
I was just chatting to Marion King this week, who used to be on your team, and she was saying this week that cash withdrawals this month are up to what they were in 2019. Isn't that fascinating? Because people are taking money out not necessarily to pay, but there are still, they're doing other things with it. But still, quite a lot of people prefer cash, and I think it's quite hard for the digital natives like us, who are kind of all about digital, to remember that actually there's an awful lot of people for whom that's not the preferred budgeting tool, that's not the preferred means of paying and budgeting for things.
But I do think, the massive acceleration through the pandemic is here to stay. The data that we see shows that our domestic volume is dramatically above where it was in 2019. Even our intra-European volume is significantly above where it was pre-pandemic. I mean, clearly, we, as everybody knows, until the corridors open up for inter-regional travel, that's going to remain somewhat depressed. But no, we've seen a big shift to digital that I'm pretty convinced is going to stick.
Oh, I love your
the Mastercard brand.
Ta-da! I love that. I want my own brand on my own phone as well.
That's the Sonic brand.
Ta-da! I love it. So let's talk a little bit about things to do with the community that you guys have been big supporters of. You've right from the very beginning, you've stood up and said we're going to support particularly our work on financial inclusion. We've done a huge amount to help, I think, move the dial across the industry and bring a collective weight. Why is it important for you guys to support us?
Well, look. I remember when I first came into the UK, Scott introduced me to you, and we were really central in what was then what we used to look at as the prepaid industry, which really became pretty rapidly the fintech industry, the emerging payments industry of the UK, and we saw the opportunity for disruption. We saw the opportunity for increased competition, and that to us was a good thing. I mean, as you know, we weren't the incumbent in debit in the market, and so this was a very good space for us to play. And supporting the fintech industry has been absolutely central to our strategy, and will continue to be. So when I look at what some of the companies that are a member of your association do in in the financial inclusion space, in the small business space, in the cross-border remittance space.
Crypto, the whole crypto world is also booming, isn't it?
Crypto world is booming. It can only be good for our industry to have that level of innovation and disruption, because otherwise we're not going to be serving consumers and businesses as best we can.
Yeah, no, I would agree with you, and it's quite interesting that we've actually now decided, following a 12-month journey of discovery and research and development, to actually rebrand, as you know, to the Payments Association. So yours is the first Insights interview to go out under the Payments Association banner. What do you think this means for us, and what does it mean for Mastercard?
Well, I think it's fantastic, Tony. The fact that you're no longer the emerging Payments Association, that you've emerged is terrific. And the awards ceremony from a few weeks ago, when you think of the scale and the talent and the creativity that's really been driven by the association over the years, it's real credit to you, Tony, and the association itself. So I'm pleased you've moved on to the Payments Association banner.
Well, thank you. And I tell you what, to me, your support, consistent support over the years, has been instrumental in us making it possible for our platform to be as influential as possible. And I'd like to think that, yes, it'll have benefited Mastercard, yes, it'll have benefited the participants, but mostly it'll influence the people out there in the street who pay and get paid day in, day out, which is fantastic. Now, final question for you. I'm sure you support all sorts of different individuals and their journey as a mentor and a supporter. But what advice would you give a new graduate who approached you thinking about following in your footsteps, career with your MBA, doing consulting, moving up the ranks in the executive, and now being a European business leader? What advice would you give them?
So look, Tony, I look for 3 leadership traits in individuals within the organisation, and why don't I just tell you what they are? The first is that sort of strategic vision thing, the thing to be able to look beyond the immediate into the future, get everybody flying in the same direction, you won't get it right all the time, but to lift your head up from the immediate and have the strategic view. So the big picture thing. That's the first. The second is almost the opposite of that, which is kind of weird. It's the ability to deliver the bottom line, to get stuff done, to wrestle the numbers quarter by quarter, in my case, over the line, or to deliver on your projects, or to be absolutely buttoned up and reliable in just your day-to-day work. So, one's the big picture, one's the focus. And the third area, and this comes a bit later in your career, is the ability to develop followership. So I can look at certain people, or almost anybody on our exec team, and everyone wants to be in their game. They have real followership. Actually, most of them would score 10, 10, 10 across all 3 of those buckets. So I would say to anybody coming in, think of those 3 buckets and how you're performing against each of them. Be willing, be collaborative, be genuine, authentic, and sometimes be a little bit patient as well, because not everything happens overnight. But if you are all those things, you will have a flourishing career, and certainly in a company like Mastercard.
Thank you very much. Some fine, earnest words of wisdom, considered counsel for future up-and-coming executives in our industry. It's been a pleasure to chat, Mark. It really has been. It's lovely. I rather wish we had a glass of gin and tonic or something between us, but that'll maybe have to wait till another time when we can go for dinner together.
Well, let's hope it's not too far in the future, Tony. Lovely to see you, and look forward to that catch up.
Thank you very much indeed. Mark Barnett
Yeah.
from Mastercard, much appreciated. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.